Episode 38 of Politically Conscious returns Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Trump's D.C. police takeover. Shelley Winter says yes. Critics cry racism in 2028 power play. Texas Democrats flee to stop losing 5 seats. Did they just abandon flood victims? And over 300,000 black women out of work under this administration. No spin, no fluff. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. Watch us live on the Mental Dialogue YouTube page.
Hey everybody, it's Emil Bryant here. Hey everybody, Emil Bryant here. Montoya is getting his stuff together. It's a little bit of a technical problem, but it's welcome back to Mental Dialogues, Politically Conscious. You know what we do while we're here. We take apart what is in the news and we try to put no spin on it because we want that history, we want that perspective, we want that way of knowing and way of being that allows us to cut through the noise and the chatter. So we always say, if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. And it's about time somebody was able to sift through this noise because it is really noise. Why is it noise? And that's something that all of us need to look at. We're hearing news, views, and opinion blended together. So when you're looking for facts, you have to be able to sort through what's opinion and what's true spin and what's an agenda that's trying to shape you to think or vote a specific way. And when you're looking at those things on the news in real time, it's hard to be able to sit through and decipher that. So what we do here at Politically Conscious is we decipher that. We try to take that spin out, try to take that out. And Montoya has been really good about challenging me. I'm supposed to represent the liberals, the progressive side. There's always someone here who represents the conservative side. That's usually our brother Leo Smith or our brother Shelley Winter, neither of whom could be available today. So we're just going to chop it up. And I'll do my best to provide some history and some context to everything that we discussed today. So as Montoya gets his tech together, let's talk about what we're seeing in the news today. Most vibrant right now is gerrymandering. So let's talk about gerrymandering. You can
be fined and can even be arrested. But now you and your administration are taking the unusual step of asking for Democratic leader Gene Wu, who we played a clip from a little while ago, to be actually removed from office. What gives you the right to override the will of his voters who elected him?
So I think the will of the people who elected him are not being met right now. The people who elected him, as well as the other Democrats who've run from their duty, they didn't elect them to run off to Illinois. They elected them to go to Austin, Texas, and cast votes as required by the Constitution. What I have the authority to do as governor is to require these members of the legislature to follow the Constitution, which is very clear on its face, where it says that these legislators must act on bills before them. They're refusing to perform their constitutional duty, and that's exactly why I filed that lawsuit in the Texas Supreme Court, and the Texas Supreme Court has required Gene Wu to respond to that, and the Texas Supreme Court is considering that right now. And what I'm seeking to do in that case is to have Gene Wu removed from office for failing to perform his constitutional requirement.
So your state had a congresswoman, Kay Granger, who tragically developed dementia, and then in the middle of her, I guess, second year in office, in her final term, she and her family just checked her into a dementia center in Texas, and nobody represented that congressional district for like 6 to 8 months or something. And I don't recall you saying anything then.
Well, I have the authority to apply the Texas Constitution to these members of the Texas House of Representatives. With regard to members of Congress, that's going to be up to the congressional delegation and to the federal laws of which the state would have no control over. What I do.
Can you hear me, Emil?
Can hear you loud and clear.
All right, y'all. So hopefully we don't lose connection. I lost video connection and mic connection. So thanks for opening that intro. I kind of saw where you were going, so I wanted to help you out and throw you a cut in there or whatever, so we can build on that. It wasn't the initial cut that we had planned to play, but we're gonna make this thing happen. Thank you for highlighting the fact that we did lose Shelly and Leo today, because we like to represent both sides. So I don't want to bore people with the intro, if you will. So we'll jump right into that cut. But you see that correspondent challenging Governor Abbott on his decision of what's happening. We talked about that on the last show, right? That the Democrats chose to flee. You personally felt like it was a strong move by the Democrats, if you will, to flee, to avoid the quorum and to avoid the gerrymandering in the 5 seats that President Trump has pretty much said, hey, we can gain these seats if we do this during this special election. As you can see, Governor Abbott is upset and actually went to the Supreme Court to say, can we remove these Democratic leaders because they're not here for their duties? Because as you beautifully pointed out on the last show, you pointed out the real reason for the special session was about what was happening with the flood victims.
That's right.
To agree, it's been juxtaposed fairly. They left to avoid the quorum in the 5 seats, but it's also delaying the actual funding for the flood victims in Texas. So that is a real life situation. I don't know what the best answer is, but you see that correspondent challenge Governor Abbott, who's saying, hey, you're using this in this moment, talking about removing them, but you've also had a situation where you've had a district go without someone in the past. So why focus on that now and not stay focused on the main issue? So that's how I understood what I just saw, but I'll hear your thoughts on it as well.
So this is funny because according to the Constitution, the governor of the state can appoint a representative to replace midterm. So when Representative Granger was checked into memory care because of her dementia, severe dementia, and eventually she passed, that seat sat vacant, but the governor has the power to appoint. Now, there's a bunch of procedures that have to happen prior to that, but he could have advocated for that. And that's what the correspondent, that's what Tapper was talking about, right? He was like, he didn't even advocate for that seat to be filled because her absence was politically to the benefit of the state and the benefit of the Republicans. Whereas in this case, the absence of the Democrats absolutely harms the Republicans. And let's be very clear. They need that quorum. They're not worried about that flood stuff. The Governor Abbott can make some executive decisions as the governor and get the relief those people need. He can tax, or not tax, but he can use the existing funding sources he has. He can redirect. It's a state of emergency. So the Democrats are absent because they're taking a stand, and there will be consequences. The Texas Constitution allows for those consequences. The Supreme Court has to go through the process to see if, in fact, what Governor Abbott is asking for is legal under the Constitution. If the Supreme Court, which leans very right, by the way, for those who don't know the Texas Supreme Court, once they say that, then the Democrats will have to make a choice: either come back and fill the quorum, and of course allow that vote to gerrymander mid-sequence between censuses, or they'll refuse and let that play out where they'll either be arrested potentially or they'll be removed from their position, and then the governor gets to appoint new people to those positions. So it's a very a challenging situation for the Democrats, but the point that I want everybody to hear is that they stood up. They decided to show some spine and delay what is probably an inevitable outcome, but at least they're showing people they got a spine, they got some backbone, they got some gumption, and they're not willing to just lay down and go, we don't know what to do, which is all they've been doing for the last several months.
So I don't know how well that sits with me, Emil, if you're suggesting that there's more likely an inevitable outcome, of meaning that this special election will take place, this quorum will take place. So if it's an inevitable outcome, then I feel for those flood victims. I'm just talking about just from a logical standpoint, and hearing you say that if this is an inevitable outcome, that we just delay relief for those flood victims, like I guess one of the worst floods in 100 years, or before I understand. Mm-hmm. So as much as we've talked about needing to have great opposition within our republic, right, within our government. The reality is it's happening at a time where people are really in need of relief. And so if this is an inevitable outcome, then I'm not sure that I'm as proud as you are of them standing up. And that's just me stating that factually. Give me one thought on that, and I'm gonna go to another cut.
You know, the most challenging part of this is that, again, I'm going to say that the governor has more resources than the legislature to do this. Let's assume that the flood happened without the gerrymandering stuff. The special session would have come in, people would have voted. But clearly there's something else going on. And the problem is that now that's a lever. The flood is being used as a lever. Those people's lives are being used as a lever. So just as tragic as the Democrats not being there, the fact is their relief is being used as a lever to force a vote on something that should not be in special session at all, period. But for the fact that the president of the United States, who has no business telling a state how to run itself, said, go find me 5 votes. And the state responded like lemmings. Texas, you're supposed to lead. Lemmings following the president, going just down the path instead of being independent, which Texas prides itself on. You know, the 5, right? The 6 flags of the Republic of Texas and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes down to it, they're following like lemmings, just like everybody else, and with this president. And it's sad to see because people's lives are hanging in the balance for politics once again.
All right, that makes sense. I see the perspective. Yeah, basically both sides are doing politicking. Is your point? Both sides are politicking, and I've talked about this. Matter of fact, I remember talking about this on the show in the past. That when the propaganda is such that it's focused on kind of like your emotions, you know, in a sense that the propaganda is heavy. And so the propaganda here is, hey, we want to get relief for these people, but in the meantime, throw in this. So that both are doing the exact same thing. So I shouldn't. And again, it doesn't make it right, or it makes it wrong that they both would leverage this in reference to this relief effort. That's your big
absolutely. And to your point, I would tell any voter, forget the incumbents, primary everybody, get rid of them all, because they're all not representing you. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. Your job is to represent the will of the people. And I guarantee you those flood victims do not have their wills represented right now.
Hey, you sound like a true independent right now, Emil, because you know that's what I always say. Get them the comments out of there. All right, let's go to the big issue for this show now that we've gotten things back in order. So let's start with this cut right here.
Well, I think we have to be willing to say the quiet part out loud. And I think as Democrats, it's facing uncomfortable conversations about crime. Look, no one wants to put kids in jail or lock them away for life. But when we ignore a problem, we allow it to fester. And we don't target what the founding issue of the problem is. And I believe for D.C., a lot of that has to do with our youth and with education. I mean, D.C. for 2022 to 2023 had about 40% of kids that faced chronic absentee. So that means they missed 10% or more of the school year. Well, where are those kids when they're not in school? They're outside causing a little bit of chaos. They're raiding grocery stores, drug stores. They're putting entire sections of the city under curfew. And the fact of the matter is the president is addressing something that is very real. We can live in this city and say it's a beautiful city, and we can also say that we have a chronic issue when it comes to our youth.
President Trump takes over D.C. You hear this correspondent highlighting, hey, 2 things can be true at once. I don't necessarily disagree with what she's saying technically, and I'm going to use the word technically here. And the reason I say that is the focus has become on exactly what she's talking about. However, this DC takeover based on the president's authority and what is allowed to be done based on the statutes, and I know that's your area of expertise. That's why I'm kind of going there, Emil. It ends up being what we're looking at when we reduce it down to how much crime specifically is happening into DC. It is sort of a red herring to focus on the actual crime that's happened specifically around DC and using it to basically say, I have the authority to do this, which I do understand that of all the high crime areas
Mhm.
that are around the country. Because here's a reality about Trump. A reality about Trump is if he could, he would do this in more places.
See, this is what people must understand about Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. has a license plate. I lived there for several years, and I lived in the area for over 17 years. The thing that makes D.C. so special is that on the license plate, it says 3 words: taxation without representation. D.C. residents pay federal income taxes, but do not have a vote in Congress. They do not have a senator. They do not have a representative. Yes, they have Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, but she does not vote. She is not one of the 435 voting members of Congress in the way that someone from Oregon or California or Florida is a voting member. And this is why DC has that license plate, that saying on this license plate. And here's the other thing that's really messed up about DC. According to the Constitution, Washington, D.C. is supposed to be administered by all of Congress. Congress delegated that authority many years ago to a mayor and city council, which then allowed them to run their own police force, fire department, etc., running D.C. like its own city, right? The D.C. in D.C. stands for District of Columbia. It is a federal district. It is not a city. It is not a state. DC has wanted statehood for many, many years, and they're getting closer and closer to having the right amount of voters agree within the city of DC that they should be their own state. There are plans and deals afoot to make DC a state by offsetting it with some other potentially another state like Utah, where they would get more representation to offset the representation that's very blue in Washington, D.C. I say all of that to be very clear about what's going on. The president of the United States, in taking over the police and sending the National Guard, has declared that he is the authority over the district, which by the Constitution is Congress. So that you have yet again the Republicans laying down and not asserting their authority, their constitutional authority to do what's right. They're the ones who should be saying DC is a mess, and they're the ones who should be working with the Mayor Muriel Bowser to figure out the best way ahead if, in fact, there's a crisis. To your point about a red herring, murder, DC was once the murder capital of America. Over almost, I think it was in 1991 or 1992, 482 murders, making it the most per capita, the murder capital of the nation. Last year, it was 40% of that, 187. The trend is going down. DC's violent crime rate is down lower than it's been in over 20 years. And yes, property crime and small petty theft is up. But that's a sign of many other factors, one of which that the commenter said in the clip, which is that DC is chronically underfunded by Congress, mind you, because Congress sets their budget, chronically underfunded and chronically undereducated and chronically underemployed. And those 3 areas are always working against the people of DC, who never get the proper representation to get their education, their funding, or their employment up to par.
Hey, good information. We got a comment here, and I don't know if I understand it, so I'm hoping you will. The Five to Love Podcast Network says, I agree the decisions being made now are rolling down to the states. Michigan free lunch program and headscarf programs are in jeopardy of closing down as per the news today. Wake up, people. Can you maybe do? I don't understand the reference point. Maybe you do. I want to make sure we are definitely
right. So recently in Michigan, there was news from the state capitol, and this is going to roll across all 50 states sooner or later, that free lunch programs, other types of programs that are funded by the government are about to get cut. This economy, which we talked about last episode with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showing that jobs fell off a cliff in June, July, and it looks like it'll be in August as well as May. If those jobs fall off cliffs, the economy is going to start to stall. And we're already seeing the federal government, because it's trying to dispense with the Department of Education, pulling back on education funding. All that money, which helped these types of programs is no longer there. So now you have states like Michigan responding with a very stark message. We're going to hurt. And the first place they're going to hurt are free lunch programs, things that help kids. So you're seeing that roll down as well.
Okay, it's reference to the economy. I didn't know if it was related to DC or something. I wanted to make sure I understood what the comment was. All right, now good stuff. Thanks for explaining that to me, Emil. Let me kind of continue down this again, the DC takeover, because from what I understand, let me play this clip. I think it'll give us a little more understanding specifically of what is allowed and what is not with Trump. In a sense, as you said, kind of if I understand you, overseating the Congress, because Congress is kind of giving the duty away. So now president is saying, hey, I can do this since Congress is giving it away to the mayor. And if I'm understanding you correctly, but let's
can be fined and can even be arrested. But now you and your administration can be fined and can even be arrested. But now.
Here we go.
850 special officers spread out across D.C. arrested 23 motherfuckers. And then later in the video, she goes through the list of what the arrests were for.
Arrests consisted of homicide, firearms offenses, possession with intent to distribute narcotics, fare evasion, lewd acts, stalking, possession of a high-capacity magazine, fleeing to elude in a vehicle, no permits, driving under the influence, reckless driving, and a bench warrant.
Spoiler alert, this is shit that happens in every city across America. But if DC is so ridden with fucking crime that the president has to illegally take it over because, side note, Section 740 of the Home Rule Act does not allow the president to just federalize the Metropolitan Police just to police crime.
So what I understand, getting a few more details into that statute, do you call that a statute? What do you call that? Make sure I'm saying it correctly, Emil, when he highlighted that actual thing that would say right. The president.
So it's called the DC Home Rule Act. It was enacted in 1973. And what that means is that
one little quick thing for you to explain it. So I just wanted to highlight the one thing that I did understand, that even if it's enacted, and what people are highlighting is that Trump's kind of twisting his authority to even be able to do it. But even from what I understand, even if enacted, is a 30-day period, and there's even a step to even get to the 30-day period. So even if he was allowed to do it, this would be at the most for 30 days. And I may be misunderstanding that, but I wanted to throw here's my understanding of it. And of course, you can correct all of that if you will.
So DC is sticky. It's a tricky sort of thing. In Article 8, Section, I think 7, I'm looking it up now to make sure I understand it. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, United States Constitution. You can read that for yourself. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. That establishes Congress as the authority over the District of Columbia. In 1973, Congress wrote the Home Rule Act and passed it. It was signed by the president, then Gerald Ford. And that allowed the people of DC to govern themselves like any city could. Because prior to that, the Constitution said Congress did all of that. So now you have a home ruled DC. Because it's Congress versus the city government of DC, there are some special modifiers in there. One of those is if there's a state of emergency, it has to be declared, and that state of emergency can be declared by the president, which would then activate federal forces to do certain things within the state, within the city. So you have that is what should happen. So the president should have declared an emergency, did not do that. He just said there's a lot of crime and I don't like it. Therefore, I'm going to federalize the Metropolitan Police Department, and I'm going to send in some National Guard. DC has its own National Guard. It has its own Air National Guard. It has its own Army National Guard. So there are guardsmen from DC who live in DC or the surrounding area who are now working on behalf of the president, federalized to do what? Crime? Posse Comitatus, the 1883, says that you do not federalize troops for crime prevention or crime control. You use them for other things like disaster relief, or if there's an invasion. So you have a very significant problem happening that's working its way through the courts as the president, who does not have the direct authority without initiating a state of emergency, taking over the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, which pretty much takes away all the power from the mayor and the city council. And then on top of that, using that police force to run sort of the city under his control, however he sees it fit, which may be more or less crime. And as you heard the commentator talk about how they're making up stuff or they're exaggerating things that happen in every major city to justify that federal presence.
I don't think they were exaggerating. He was just pointing out they're making, just by stating what happens, is seemingly adding to what he's saying. Hey, there's all this extra crime, and in reality, it's the same thing that happens in every city. So I don't know if it's necessarily exaggeration. Yeah, I feel what you're saying there. Let me highlight. We're going to bring Shelly into this show just from a comment that he made. I obviously hate that I'm not able to ask him specifically about this, but Shelly is actually a fan of Trump taking over in D.C. Here's a comment that he's made that I wish I could obviously challenge him personally on the show, but unfortunately got called in by his work today and was not able to be on the show. But he says, this is something he wrote 3 days ago. He goes, a white guy gets shot by stray bullets in D.C. 1 month later, another white guy gets beaten bloody. White people's response, sending troops in. Now compare that to years of black lives being lost, many of them innocent, many children. And what was the response of black leadership? More money thrown at ever-increasing programs that enrich the politicians and their hand-picked, chosen few. I take a big issue with this comment. Again, wish I could challenge him personally on the show. But I take a big issue because the first thing that I would ask him, and obviously you get your thoughts on it, Emil. But the first thing I would ask him when he says white people's response is to send troops in, I want to know what other president, one, would have done this other than Trump. Of the list of last 8 presidents, if anyone, maybe Reagan, in my opinion, but I don't think any other president would have made this decision. And the reason I'm particularly pointing that out, Emil, is because I completely disregard, in my opinion, the misuse of race in the way that Shelley's using it to say white people's response was to send in troops, when the reality is we all understand Trump has always asserted his authority, always been behind the blue in a way to quickly want to use him. He's always highlighted that. He's never swept that under the rug in his approach to wanting to give police complete immunity in how they act. So we understand that he would send them in, but to highlight this as look at a white response versus a black response, I think is completely disingenuous, in my opinion, when I think the only president that would do this is Trump. Do you understand where I'm going?
Because I'm going to be very, very blunt. In my opinion, this is a trial balloon to see what else he could do. LA was a trial balloon. DC is a trial balloon. Absolutely. I'm seeing it's a matter of time before Cheyenne, Wyoming, or someplace else has a problem that needs to be solved with federalized troops. I'm really, really, really concerned because if you go to Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, who has been DC's representative / delegate / advocate for decades, she has a very strong statement on her website, and I want to read it here. You can find it at norton.house.gov. President Trump's decision to federalize MPD and activate the DC National Guard to address crime is an historic assault on DC home rule, is a counterproductive, escalatory seizure of DC's resources to use for purposes not supported by DC residents, and is more evidence of the urgent need to pass my DC statehood bill. Crime in DC reached a 30-year low in 2024 and is down 26% compared to the same time period last year. The administration is justifying the decision by misleadingly citing years-old statistics. If the federal government wanted to be helpful, it could confirm judges to DC courts, which face a perpetual vacancy crisis due to inaction in the Senate. We should pass my DC Courts Home Rule Act to give the DC Council authority over the jurisdiction and organization of the local DC courts. Congress should also pass my bill to expedite the appointment of local DC judges. She's making it very clear this power grab is not about DC public safety. It is about something foreign to American politics. DC is the only place in the contiguous 50 states where people do not have full representation for their tax dollar. They get punished for living inside the district. That is what's happening again. They're being punished by the president because he's using this as a political football to advance an agenda that has nothing to do with the safety, health, or prosperity of the people of DC.
Yep, and the thing is, I agree with you on that, Emil. And the big thing is, again, I know I keep highlighting that we don't have Shelley, but I know he's very much against often the use of the police on citizens in that way. So for him to be behind this, because if you think about the history we've even had with Shelley on this show, how his logic goes all the way out when it comes to quote unquote black on black crime. Like he loses his logic. And I think that emotion leads to him, in my opinion, to make I think this is an ignorant statement. I would have said that to him directly.
Sure.
To highlight that Trump being, again, would you agree out of the last 8 presidents, Trump, maybe Reagan would be the only ones that he would even consider doing something like this? And I'm just going based on Reagan's personality. I don't know if Reagan would be
and I think Reagan would probably have thought that was radioactive. The last time anybody took over was in 1989, and Congress tried it, and it was a disaster. It's always a disaster when people not from DC try to run DC. It had been a disaster. That's why they did the Home Rule Act, and it's going to be a disaster again because the president's agenda is not a healthy, vibrant, prosperous DC. It is something completely foreign to that. And so putting those troops in and making a police presence and enforcing curfews is all going to play red meat to the political base. But in actuality, it harms fellow Americans who have no true representation in Congress. And that is going to be significant.
I respect that. And I know you've always kind of had that issue with Washington not having that representation. You've highlighted that on the show before. So I understand that's your focus. I'm actually, to a degree, wanting to dive into the racial aspect of this conversation.
Sure.
Because that's what's being used as the propaganda. Right? I'm talking about the aspect of, like, for example, let me give you another comment that Shelley said on this page, and this will really kind of forward kind of where I'm going. But he says, another comment he made just a couple of days ago, he says, federal police in DC to tackle crime is racist. Me, are you saying all the black people in DC are criminals? Like, you see how it's being, he's kind of in a role playing it up. We're already watching that propaganda happen, but to make this the focus on whether crime is high, which is a red herring to, as you said, a balloon trial for the bigger picture of what will he be able to do in other cities. When we keep our focus on what the real issue is, to get bogged down in the red herring of whether this is racist or not really plays into, and in my opinion, allows the president to keep doing what you have pretty much laid out is illegal in this moment. And so to move the conversation into whether crime is high in DC or not, which it still is, even with the low drop, it's still 4th in murders. Like, I'm willing to call DC what it is. I'm not scared to call it what it is, but what people are doing in the media, they're arguing over whether crime is high or not. They fail for the red herring and overlook the real issue. I guess that's my final comment on this. Any thoughts from you, brother?
Yeah. So DC went, we lovingly know it as Chocolate City or DC Dark Country. There's a lot of nicknames for the city because it was once a majority black city, all the way until about 2011 when it dipped below 50%, which it had done in a very long time, and it's still below 50%. But the plurality of people in DC are still black. It's about 43, 44% black and about 35, 36%. But the demographics of DC are rapidly changing. The whole city is gentrifying. Places that used to be very dangerous are becoming very livable because of gentrification. And I feel like from a racial perspective, this is just more of the same. Like you're pushing people out of DC who are already priced out of the market because of how expensive real estate is, among other things. The fact is that DC schools are not the best schools in the area. So a lot of times people with children are moving away from DC just to get to better schools. So when you start compounding all that, and then you throw in this federal presence from the president, you get this picture that perhaps Black people are not necessarily welcome like they once were in Washington, DC, because you're seeing so many factors change the demographics rapidly. At one point in the last 5 years, DC was getting 1,000 new residents per month.
Wow.
Net. It was one of the fastest growing cities in the nation, but its borders don't expand, right? So you have this, people were drawn to DC, even though they don't have proper representation. And those people were not more Black people necessarily. They were more multicultural with a lot of white folks coming in. So you have that dynamic coming in to play as well. So it's not just Black versus white. It's not just racism. There is a changing demographic in DC right now that's turning it from Chocolate City to maybe Mocha City.
No, fair enough. And again, I think I'll say is that would have been my challenge to Shelly in the role that he plays. To not play into that would be my challenge to him. All right, let's go a different route. Let's talk about something that's happened on a granular level, but I think may have some bigger picture issues.
The president fired the Librarian of Congress. Why did he choose to do that?
We felt she did not fit the needs of the American people. There were quite concerning things that she had done at the Library of Congress in the pursuit of DEI and putting inappropriate books in the library for children.
So that was the answer that the White House gave last week when a reporter asked why Trump had fired Carla Hayden, the long-serving Librarian of Congress. Now, despite what her answer seems to suggest, the Library of Congress is not a lending library. While it holds tens of millions of publications and manuscripts, presidential papers, and other material, it doesn't loan books out to children. And if Caroline Levitt really doesn't understand why the Library of Congress holds books she doesn't like, here is a quick civic education film to bring her up to speed, courtesy, of course, of the U.S. government.
Have you ever heard of the Library of Congress, Tim? It's the most important library in the country. And one of the things it does nowadays is keep records and proofs of all the copyrights that are issued by the United States. 2 copies of almost every book that is published are sent to the library at Washington.
That's right. The Copyright Office is part of the Library of Congress, so it has a whole lot of books, including ones the Trump administration may not like. That's part of its purpose. It also houses the Congressional Research Service, an agency that works exclusively for Congress to provide confidential policy and legal analysis to lawmakers regardless of party. That's why it was pretty notable that Trump named his former personal attorney and current Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche as the acting Librarian of Congress. The fact that Trump is trying to install an executive branch official to lead a legislative agency is incredibly concerning, especially given the privileged information that the Library of Congress holds. So it sure seems like Trump's attempt to take over the Library of Congress is about perhaps a lot more than just books he doesn't like, I think.
I thought this was the merit-based administration, Emil.
Merit is defined by what I like and who I like, not necessarily by what you've done or what you have accomplished. So the Library of Congress is one of the very serious matters that we don't discuss enough. So I'm glad we're bringing it up today, Montoya, because people need to know how powerful the library is. I've written a book that is in the Library of Congress because my book has a copyright. And as a copyright holder, I have the privilege of inserting my book into the National Historic Record of the United States, because that's what the Library of Congress is. It is the recorder of all publications, not just books, audio, video, movies, anything copyrighted goes through the Library of Congress. If you register your copyright, a copy of that work goes into the library. It's one of the most extensive libraries on the planet. It is one of the most beautiful. I used to be a card-carrying member of the press corps to the Library of Congress. I had rights to be able to comb through those stacks beyond what the public can do. And when you see the vast amount of information that you can glean from that beautiful monument to American thoughtfulness, genius, if you will, they have records that go back to the founding of the nation. They have maps, they have recordings, they have you name it. And those are available to the public by way of their website. So when anyone messes with the Library of Congress, it doesn't matter if it's from the right or from the left, you should be up in arms. That is the National Historic Record of works published in the United States. And to tamper with that in any way, and I think her name was Carla, the former librarian of Congress, who was there for a decade under different regimes, different presidents, including Trump. Yeah, that's right. She was there under Obama, under Trump, and under Biden. And now all of a sudden she's persona non grata. That's because it wasn't her work. It was because she represented something. You know what one of her biggest challenges was? Getting more people to respect and understand the value of the Library of Congress, DEI. She was reaching out to different people to make sure they knew what resource they had as an American citizen. So you're seeing her be fired, not because she was poorly cataloging or documenting the history and the publications of the United States, but because she chose to do outreach on behalf of the people of this nation to show them what they had as a resource in their backyard.
Hey, one of Five Loves to Podcast says, this is just another example of idiots are running the U.S. Congrats to the racist right. Race and history changing the narrative. I'm never surprised by you, Emil, that you would know so much information. Now, because for anybody out there watching, we don't prepare these clips. So Emil didn't know I was going to play that clip. So if you're new to this, Emil is literally just that, just a bucket of education and information when it comes to this. So I didn't know you were a card-carrying, if you will, member of the Library of Congress, right? But I highlight that because when I saw this, I was like, this is important. I was able to recognize on my own, again, that's what politically conscious is. We're here to raise your consciousness. And so, again, what's missing from this show, because our point is to have both sides, is to ask a MAGA supporter like Shelley to say, hey, how do you look at these things? Because we can't keep seeing these quote unquote small things, these under the rug type, radar type things. We can't keep seeing them as nothing. They're more than nothing because they continue to happen. There's a headline just this week that says the White House is reviewing the Smithsonian exhibits to make sure they align with Trump's visions. We can't keep sleeping on that there's these very intentional attempts and not talk about those things. But unfortunately for this, on today's show, I can't get that perspective. But that's the challenge that I wanted to be able to ask to the to the supporters in this situation. I'm gonna go ahead and play another clip that continues to kind of highlight this other issue that's also in the news. Carla, being an African-American woman, here's something that's been highlighted consistently here recently this week or last week and a half in the media.
A new report shows more than 300,000 black women have left the workforce in just the last several months. That's according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Joining me now is gender economist Katika Roy to break this all down and why they're leaving. Katika, thank you so much for being with us. You recently wrote an article where you say that this isn't happening by accident. Why do you think it is happening?
This is happening because of cuts to public sector positions. So if you look at the federal labor force, black women make up just over 12% of the federal labor force. It's about double their representation in the labor force overall. And when you have targeted cuts up to 50% in organizations such as the Department of Education and HHS, you're not just trimming the fat, you're actually cutting the economic backbone for black women.
Wow. And so what are some of the spillover effects from all of this?
Well, one of the things that we know is that there is a connection between women's labor force participation and GDP. So just Black women's labor force participation has dropped by just over 2% in the last 3 months. And that has sucked over $37 billion out of US GDP. So this is the economic cost of gender policy ignorance.
This is really fascinating because do you think that most people are unaware of the actual impacts of things like this?
Absolutely. So when we often think about women's issues or Black women's issues, we think of it as an over there problem. It's not. It's an everybody problem. When our economy grows, that has more jobs and more income for everyone. So we know, for instance, overall, that for every 1 percentage point that women leave the labor force, there's a $146 billion hit to GDP.
Oh my gosh.
So, as a data hog, as I call myself, I'm a little skeptical of what I see there, Emil. Again, I know this 300,318 has been highlighted consistently. At least I've seen it highlighted throughout the week. But I'm a little skeptical because, one, let's think of the source, MSNBC.
Sure.
So what happens is, as a data hog, I'm always sharing people. When I share data has to be put in context. And so what I see there, and I haven't looked up these numbers, but I'm just going to highlight what I'm concerned about when I watch it. So what I see there is a narrow focus on particular numbers. And so when there's a narrow focus, a lot of times I need to have something to compare it with. So when somebody delivers me numbers without a comparison to the larger data set or the additional groups, I'm always concerned, are you trying to paint a picture? And I say that from the standpoint of, if we're honest, due to and they highlighted this to a degree, due to the federal job cuts and African Americans being relatively overrepresented in the federal federal labor force compared to the civilian labor force, then unfortunately, those big cuts to a degree are inevitable. What I am concerned about is someone's taking that particular number to try to, in a sense, paint a narrative. I'm not saying I'm okay with 300,000 sisters losing their job. I'm not saying that at all, but I am leery of how the numbers are being presented, because I would need to know, for example, how many men lost their job, if that makes sense.
Sure.
What is the context, or a 2% decrease? There's probably a decrease across all demographics since so many jobs were cut out. So I don't know if other demographics also had a 2% decrease. Those are the type of numbers I would need to know if the numbers you're giving me are within context, to avoid somebody giving me propaganda. Your thoughts, brother?
So this is where, I hate to be the bearer of not bad news, because I really want to rock with what MSNBC is trying to say. But the problem is, I just posted in the chat a link to the actual Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the reason why I did that is because it directly refutes the problem. Now, across the board, cuts are impacting everyone, and the most vulnerable population is Black women. We've seen that statistically over and over again. So it's not like it's not true that there is a major impact on Black women. The problem is, if you look at the numbers from July 2024 to July 2025, you see the labor participation rate isn't significantly decreased. If you look at the employment rate, you see it's not significantly, or unemployment rate, it's not significantly increased. Those are some of the telltale numbers that defy that narrative. The anecdotal part of me really wants to feel what she's saying. But the fact is that the numbers don't bear out that direct narrative. In fact, who's being hammered a little harder are Black men. If you look by the BLS statistics.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't looked them up, but like I said, this is just my attempt to kind of show. Again, we say, if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us.
You got to get the original data, and the original data bears out a different picture. What I do know is that Black women are the backbones of many families in our nation. They are the primary breadwinner for many families. So when they get affected, the wider impact is definitely felt. So the narrative I would have used if I were talking is the second and third order effect of these job cuts on Black families, because Black women have been participating in the labor force so significantly for so long that their money is we don't have generational wealth that we can fall back on. So we fall back on second jobs, or if a Black woman is a primary breadwinner, she's beginning to get that education and break through some of the ceilings that were once there for prior generations. Therefore, they are more likely to be leaned upon by their extended family, especially their parents, in terms of caregiving, in terms of the finances to support their elderly parents who don't have enough fixed income to go around. So the impact on Black women is absolutely real, but the numbers don't tell that story as well as it should. What I would have done is pull that story out and talk about the impact versus.
So, yeah, if I can, to keep us moving, cut off a little bit. Sorry about that.
No problem.
But just to kind of highlight again, we want to make you aware when propaganda is being handed to you. That is a specific narrative trying to paint an emotion, which I would say from the left is something that we've been highlighting too long. Instead of them going to things that are effective that actually could be used, they go to storylines and narratives that play to, if you will, the racial construct. And so I'm still upset that is a narrative being pulled out and kind of made up, because as you said, the actual numbers don't show that. But I'm not surprised, because of identity politics still gets leaned upon. And while I just highlighted prior to that clip, I'm concerned about what happened to the sister at the Library of Congress. I'm concerned about that Trump is not following the law specifically of how he's taking over December. He's kind of, finagling how he's using that, right? So there's all these things that are real that we have to be concerned about. And now this play gets made to kind of lean into that. And I'm just saying, we got real issues that I feel like to a degree kind of get swept over. And here's the dilemma of Trump. I'm about to play a clip that just makes it, in my opinion, why we see such a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a split between how even African Americans see Trump. And I'm not telling you how to see Trump, but I'm about to play a cut that says, if you look at what you just heard, you're like, you're gonna automatically say, look, what he's been doing has been hurting Black women. Like that's the narrative they want to give you, right? We just highlighted. Unfortunately, those numbers aren't factual. But if you go with that narrative, then you also have President Trump who does something like this.
Of all the bad things that Donald Trump has done, he has done one thing I'm super excited about. He appointed Miss Alice Johnson to be the pardon czar. And if you don't know this story, you have to have a heart of stone not to be moved by this. Miss Alice Johnson was put in jail unjustly for life for a first-time nonviolent drug offense. Kim Kardashian found out about it. She raised an alarm.
I saw this 7 months ago, and I have been daily phone calls with the White House.
And Donald Trump, in the first term, freed her and gave her the opportunity now as the pardon czar to free more people unjustly incarcerated like her. Look, I don't like 99.9% of what Trump has done, but no president has ever given a formerly incarcerated person a job and a seat in the White House to help other people, and that's extraordinary. I give him full credit.
For me, I'm looking at the economy. Again, I think the president's critique of the problem as it pertains to trade, reshoring, trying to bring some jobs back, I think he's actually 100% spot on. But the way he's going about it, guys, I mean, hell, I got to be honest, even as a conservative, and I support the president, it's just not the right way. You got to be more surgical. Let's have a sort of fair 2.52% tariff with our allies, Europe, United Kingdom, Mexico, Canada. I think they'd actually come to the table and agree with that. Bring them to the table and put all of the focus and emphasis on China, because they are the greatest adversary, and that's where the real imbalance exists.
So you have those stories. So when we get caught up into the identity politics, you get, for example, the cut we just played about the 300 Black women saying, hey, look, he's specifically, people can paint the narrative, he's specifically hurting Black women. Look at 300,000 lost. And then you get the right saying, well, look at this example of what he did for this sister right here, which is absolutely phenomenal. You cannot sleep on that. And I'm just saying, we as a people get caught up in those dialogues, and to a degree, I think, miss what's important. So I hope that what we're doing in Politically Conscious helps raise the conscience about what actually matters. And again, I can't take away nothing from what Trump did there, because what I've always said just as a philosophy about presidents prior to Trump even being president the first time, what I've always said, if you're on your side, on the left or right, on your team, like a football team, and you're such that big a fan that if you feel like a president has done nothing right or a president has done nothing wrong, you're absolutely missing the boat. You should be able to highlight the reality of somebody being in that position. You or I could be in that position, Emil. Not that I ever want it, but we're going to get some things right and some things wrong. And based on what you're looking for, I may get more things right that you like or more things wrong that you like. But people have gotten to the point where people literally will say these presidents, Obama did nothing right or did everything wrong. Like, people literally are talking about that position in that manner. If you're feeling that way, you are being misled by propaganda. That's kind of the bigger point I wanted to make and why I played that cut. Your thoughts, Emil?
Yeah. So Trump is a marketing genius. Let's always remember that first, that his job is to make his brand sparkle in ways that are often unique and they catch the eye. So here we are talking about something he did. I give him credit for releasing her in his first term. I give him credit for appointing her to a commission on executive clemency, right? She doesn't have any power. She gets to make a recommendation along with others, and that recommendation can be approved or rejected by the president. So let's be very clear. She does not have the power of the pardon. She has at best the power of recommendation. But the other thing that makes this really funny is 2 years ago, under the Biden administration, they produced a White House paper on alternative sentencing and other stuff from the Domestic Policy Council. That was the real work, right? There was no flash. There was no marketing behind that. That's one of the things the Democrats do poorly. Is they do great groundwork and then tell you nothing.
Nothing.
Democrats, if you're listening, stop hiding good work. Okay, never mind. So this is where you see the difference between substance and splash. She's splash. It's good. I'm not saying it's bad.
Gotcha.
But the real work is in policy and making sure that people don't even get to the point where they need a pardon or clemency. And that's where you're not seeing the administration doing the hard work of actually undoing unjust policies and laws from the last 50 years or 60 years of the quote unquote war on drugs. So we can't really talk about her without mentioning how we got here in the first place. That the war on drugs initiated by a Republican president for the purpose of distracting people from the rights that they were exercising and freedoms they were trying to establish into what we see today, which is a splashy, big deal, but doesn't have the substance of policy behind it that would affect generations to come.
Hey, good stuff. Last cut for the day, brother, and we'll get you out of here. Thank you for rocking with us for episode 38. Hopefully we'll have one of our brothers from the right, if you will, on the next week's show.
How close are we to another?
Go ahead and say what you were saying before I play.
I said it's been you and me throughout this entire thing, so I've enjoyed it. But I really do want Shelly and Leo on the show. I love bantering with them and really dropping the nuggets.
Yeah, that's the point. The point is to get it from both perspectives so we can make sure we're weeding through the propaganda. But it is what it is. Here's the last cut for the day. And this is just something, again, to see how people are seeing it out there and see what you think about this one.
How close are we to another civil war?
I think we're closer than we'd like to think. And I used to be afraid to talk about it. Now I think it's important for us to talk about it.
To talk about a civil war?
Yeah, because I think we have to be aware of where we're at. I don't think it's going to be north and south with large marching armies. If I live in Illinois, there's going to be Republicans and Democrats in Illinois. I do think it could get violent easily.
I mean, that's scary.
It is scary.
If a sitting representative like Kinzinger thinks a second civil war is possible, it's something we need to take seriously.
So I decided to gather Americans in one of our most sacred traditions of civic unity, the corporate focus group, bringing together conservatives and liberals in Purple, Arizona, who all think civil war is a real possibility. The Civil War is tomorrow. What is the skill set you bring to the battlefield?
Well, I'm good with a gun.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. James?
I have survival skills. I was in the military. I know how to shoot a weapon, hand-to-hand combat if I have to. I can stick you with a knife and not, cry about it.
We're laughing about sticking people with a knife, but okay. Lansing, what skills?
Leadership.
Leadership?
Yeah, I just feel there's going to need to be some leaders.
Bo, what skills do you have?
Critical thinking.
Jesus. For all of the liberals here, we have a leader and a critical thinker. This is why the blue side is
Hey, that's how, to a degree, you never know. I'm not saying that highlights how most Americans feel. However, there are some who literally think what we're witnessing has this potential. Now, again, I'm not saying this to, if you will, create that fear. I don't want to add to that fear. However, there are moves where people think that we're getting to this point, and it's literally over political lines. Because what I do agree with out of the big cut, it won't be a North versus South thing, obviously, because of the history of, people don't even believe the history that we actually fought the Civil War to get rid of enslavement, which we actually did, but that's a whole nother conversation. But people are really starting to believe and think, and people are preparing as militias have risen over the past, how long has it been since Obama was president?
2016, 2017, when he left.
So last decade, because we saw a rise in militias after President Obama becomes, that number has continued, and the FBI has literally pointed it out in their stats, and you got people believing this type of stuff. So, just give me a thought on that, man, and we'll get out of here. I definitely would have loved to get a thought from, the left and the right on this, because I do want to see how, those who are politically conscious like yourself, how are y'all seeing these things, where I would say for people who are stroked by the fear, we may assume the extreme of things, and I still hold on hope that we're not at that extreme. I may be wrong. How do you feel as someone who's very aware and politically astute?
I'm going to laugh at the thought that there's a second Civil War. We've been fighting a cold Civil War since 1865, right? And it was led by the Daughters of the Confederacy, who fundamentally changed how history was written and read, turning the Civil War into the lost cause, and then romanticizing the South into something that it wasn't, besides a rebellious, cantankerous group of people who were absolutely traitors against the United States of America. I say all that because we're nowhere near even the flashpoints of the 1960s, when after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, you had riots in literally every major city. There were over 250 city riots after he was assassinated. We're nowhere near that kind of flashpoint. We're nowhere near the kind of flashpoint that people talked about, where the federal government was beginning to take over or was threatening to take on people in rural America who were guns, Ruby Ridge, and all that sort of stuff. So you have a completely different tenor than those times in the past, where there were actual shooting matches between individual citizens and the federal government. And if there is going to be a civil war, it will be over things like this DC takeover, where people are going to say, hold up, the federal government is not responsible for running my city. There will be rebellions in that vein, but there will not be a civil war. And there will be people who support the federal government, say whatever we need to do to maintain law and order, we do that. And there will be another group of people who say, no, we have states, counties, and cities, governments for a reason. We're going to honor those as well. Those will be where the battle lines are drawn, but they're not going to be hard and fast. They're not going to be racial. They're not going to be rural versus urban. They're not even going to be red state versus blue state. They're going to be very individual battles, and people are going to find themselves straddling both sides of the fence, because there's going to be a reason not to take one side versus the other. This is a very nuanced conversation.
No, I love it. And again, tell me if I'm wrong, but that's another reason why I would have loved to challenge Shelley to quit stroking that racial aspect of this, because it leads to more people feeling like that guy And as he said, the focus group is whatever. Just the fact that he was even doing a focus group kind of points out how far away we are from it, right?
Right.
Yeah. But are there plenty of Americans who think that way? Yes. But thinking that way, for everybody watching, doesn't mean we're, to your point, Emil, anywhere close to that. So for all of the fear and stuff you can see on TV, and now we have our phones in our hands to stroke more fear, for anybody that believing that we're close to a civil war, you're not paying attention. We are so far from that. And I hope that's the type of consciousness that we can give you, not to settle you and say that we're right. It's just the reality of the racial stuff gets stroked, the transgender stuff, all of that gets stroked for you to feel this way just for guidance on a political decision of somebody trying to dupe you. That's the reality. Don't believe those fears to that degree is how I would close this today. Thank you, Emil. One last thought from you and we out of here.
I want to circle back to the Library of Congress, and I encourage our listeners and viewers to go back to Lizzo playing a crystal flute from the largest flute collection in the world, which is housed at the Library of Congress. So have some fun and learn a little bit about your Library of Congress, which is one of the most phenomenal libraries in all of history, and definitely the most phenomenal in all of the United States, because it brings something beautiful and unusual and very informative to all of our lives, whether we know it or not. So take a look at Lizzo playing one of the most valuable flutes ever made, and certainly from one of the largest collections in the world, the largest collection in the world, housed by the Library of Congress. Go look that up, libraryofcongress.gov.
As our president has his crony running temporarily running it right now, that's not to be slept on. We'll see y'all next time. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. We out.